we have 3 weeks left today in person. Next Tuesday will be online, 6:30, maybe a little bit later. I'll send you an update, maybe 7. And then 2 weeks from today, Professor McDonald will join us, go over your projects with you. We'll have pizza and my last class as well in person, okay? 3 more weeks. So what I wanted to talk about tonight was I wanted to talk a little more about what we were looking at last week with the pairs trading idea, and give you some thoughts on how I would what I would learn from having been part of that chapter, and then I'll give you a small assignment that uses some of those ideas. We'll get that out to you this week. On the assignments, Professor McDonald's are pretty well defined. I suggest you work on those, and don't worry about deadlines. We'll get to the end. Everybody will succeed. Okay, so just do as much as you can. We'll try to make it a growth experience, and that's where we are. Looks good. Recording going here. Okay. Okay, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. So, obviously things have changed. We've talked about this before a lot in the past, really 2 years, where anybody, with a certain amount of skill and education can really go far in programming ideas due to the presence of large language models that facilitate creating code in response to questions, right? Whereas that was not the case in 2022 or 2023 even 2024, I'd say probably. There were ways to get answers, but they took time. Now if you ask your large language model the right question, it will, if you could describe this kind of an interesting exercise, you could describe to say one of these algorithms. So let's say I wanted to evaluate the k-means clustering algorithm on this data set using the S&P 500. And Gemini and the like have probably read this book, among other things, and have certainly seen this code, so they might just spit this right thing out, or other versions of this thing which are similar that import data, apply some sklearn package, and you've already told it I want k-means clustering, and then you might ask it, what else could I do besides k-means clustering? And it might say, well, you could try agglomerative clustering or affinity propagation, and then give you those answers and present something that looks very similar to this notebook, maybe as a Python file, and then you'd be done. Okay, and the question is, well, what have you done, and what can you do with it, right? So what we saw here was that the k-means idea. First of all, for stock data, just a reminder, or any kind of security traded commodity or FX or even bonds, perhaps, most of our analyses will focus on returns as opposed to prices. The statistical justification for this is prices are not stationary; they tend to go up, basically, but returns tend to be more stationary. There's a thing called stochastic volatility, which says that sometimes the market's really crazy and returns volatility is wild. Sometimes the market's very quiet and it's not wild. So that's That's not stationary. Stationary would mean that the volatility on any day is expected to be the same as any other day. We know when a war starts, commodity prices are going to be more volatile than they were a year ago, let's say, when there wasn't a war going on, right? But it's a good start anyway to say, well, I'll take the returns, so at least I stabilize the first moment of what I'm looking at. And given the returns, just a little, how many people are, what degrees are people getting here? What do you,
MBA in finance.
MBA in finance, okay? And you? What degree are you in? What degree are you, what degree program are you in?
What degree are you trying to get?
In the firm program.
Okay, I'm sorry, you don't have to. Okay, and your firm too?
No, I'm MS FinTech.
You're MS FinTech, okay?
MBA data analytics.
MBA what?
With data analytics.
Data analytics, okay?
Yeah.
Firm.
Firm, okay?
Firm.
Firm, so we got 3 firms and 4 firms.
What is a firm?
Firm is
Financial risk management.
financial,
And
Oh,
enterprise
FRM,
risk
firm.
management.
Got it.
yeah, it was financial risk management, now it's financial enterprise and risk management. Enterprise being a big component of what people have to keep track of.
I'll ask that, maybe this is
Yeah.
a much more loaded question, but what is the value of the firm with the advent of AI now?
Well, I mean, risk management is a general, is generally useful around financial institutions,
Of
right?
course.
So that's the firm. Then the enterprise piece addresses the fact that in addition to market risks and credit risk, which were the most studied part of FRM, enterprise risks are also important, things like operational, these things. This follow me.
So me as an allocator, I want somebody that's gonna build me a portfolio that is, I'm gonna go get a firm guy.
Well, that's an FRM guy, I would say. Well, that's more of a MBA finance, I think, right? Who does investment.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Me, I would wanna go get somebody with a firm degree that can look at my portfolio and say, okay, this is where your VAR is, or I can just get the bank to do that. But I want somebody in-house to do that for me, you know?
Well, yeah, you would need people to understand, build, potentially understand what are the meanings of these things, right? Where the enterprise piece comes in, most recently, you saw that Anthropic published this new model, Mythos, which they chose not to disseminate widely because they had discovered that the AI was capable of examining large code bases and finding security flaws in it. So looking at the Chrome browser, or looking at Microsoft Outlook perhaps, or looking at the code for Apple OS X perhaps, or Android operating system, or banking software that is relied upon for secure transactions. They found that their AI is very good at finding those security flaws and potentially exploiting them. So this is an enterprise level concern, and what Anthropic did was they decided to alert, among other things, the Federal Reserve Bank to the issue, and then also invite selected partners like Google, JP Morgan, obviously Microsoft, every large, I'm sure Amazon, every large scale software operation. I'm going to turn this thing off because I don't know why it wants to do this.
I mean, it seems like there's significant value in this AI that they could flip into.
Well, the concern that they have, right, is it's not just that they don't want to be responsible for, I know what happened there. They don't want to be responsible for their software being used in that way, right? But the other concern, of course, is that they see that their software can do this, right? So why would somebody else not be able to
Agreed, I got you.
create the same thing? And we know that, all of the AIs are, let me just
ChatGPT's already said that they got the same level of program coming out in a couple of weeks.
Right, right, so, of course, ChatGPT has to say that, to say, hey, we're right there
And
with you. but-
There's people saying that this is nothing more than a marketing ploy by Anthropic to push Mythos.
Yeah, people who probably don't know, but are just kind of random speculators on the internet, right? I'm not saying that it's not, just that, they saw, they made a big thing about it, right? I don't think they put their corporate reputation on the line for a big nothing burger, where everybody gets this and says, oh, this is so stupid, why did they alert everybody?
But they did some stupid stuff in their code though too. Like they made it, to save tokens, they made it stop checking if something was valid after 50 entries, and that came out at the same time. That's how all this stuff got leaked.
Well, look, no, the leaks were a different issue,
Yeah.
right? Which was when they leaked their entire code base. There's another issue. Yeah, no, people make mistakes when writing software. The point of what their Mythos thing was that Mythos is good at finding those mistakes and exploiting them, right? And they are aware. It is also true that we know that most AI models are in this constant neck and neck battle for claiming first place at whatever particular metric is hot at the moment. And they're all using similar technology. They all go to the same schools, they all read the same papers, they all have essentially the same capabilities. Some are better than others, but still they're largely similar. And consequently, whatever they did find now will turn up somewhere else, certainly at ChatGPT, but more to the point, smaller things like OpenSeek or other people who are not necessarily as spiritually minded as the good people at Anthropic. An example would be the North Korean army is famous for exploiting weaknesses in cryptocurrency security. They recently being 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, they hacked a protocol called Drift, which was like probably the fourth biggest protocol on Solana, which was a place where people could deposit their cryptocurrencies and then speculate on what are called perpetual futures, which is largely a leveraged play on whether Ether or Solana or Bitcoin is going to go up or down. And I read a story about it yesterday. They were hacked via social engineering, and again, it was by the Republic of North Korea, where they had credible actors who had knowledge of the space come to the Drift and said, we want to invest in your platforms. We're hedge fund type people and we have money. They spent like 6 months building up this relationship and sending code to Drift, which Drift would then run on their machines. And then the last piece was they found, they got the keys to 2 signatures, 2 wallets essentially, which they were able to use to penetrate what's called a multi-sig. A lot of crypto code, when you change your blockchain, the people who own the blockchain will have a team of people that are signed approvers, and they have to have some majority, or in this case it was a 2 out of 5. So they managed to socially engineer 2 of the 5 wallets, and then they absconded with $250 million out of the $500 million that was on the protocol. And the same North Korean army cadre had taken 1.7 billion from Bybit, probably the 3rd largest crypto exchange in the world, in February of 2025. So they're stealing money from the people who are supposed to be the sharpest at this business, right? But so yeah, people make mistakes, and Anthropic is saying, look, this is coming, and these will end up in the hands of potentially bad actors, where they can hack the power plant, for example, or
They've already done that.
Codes that are more critical to human safety, right? We've all seen that science fiction.
Well, they shut down the East Coast pipeline maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. So no fuel came up the East Coast for like a week. They've also had a fluoride plant in Florida got hacked, except the guy was watching it in real time and he saw the fluoride level spike up in the water system, so he shut it down himself. So that's
we
already
could be
coming.
pretty confident that, say, the United States military and Chinese military probably have people who are capable of acting at this level, but
Supposedly,
who don't, because.
supposedly the NSA is 20 years ahead of all this stuff as to what they can do if they wanted to do it.
Well, you're right, I mean, but, you know, it's a kind of, it's sort of a nuclear, attack, at the code level, right? Because they're also aware that their counterparts in other countries are probably quite capable of hacking, you know, PSE&G or something like that, right? You know, it's, you know, in the old, it's a scary world out there, right? Okay, so let's do conduct activate. So, as I was saying, in terms of books for this class, this book is getting old, which is why I did not really recommend you buying it. You could get a lot of information just from looking at the notebooks. The book I do like quite a bit, and I will recommend that you, if you have interest in this area, that you go and get it when the third edition comes out, which is supposed to be literally any day now. The book I would have used, adopted for this class, except I knew the third edition was coming, and the second edition's been out for 6 years. So I used the second edition first couple of times I taught this course, but as you get further and further from the publication date, the Git repo becomes somewhat stagnant. It's using old versions of various types of code. It becomes harder and harder to get all the notebooks to run right off of the repo. In some ways more time than it's worth. But this author, whom I communicate with somewhat regularly, it has come up with third edition. It's going to be out in 2026. It's going to be 27 chapters, probably like 1,100 pages or something. I would buy the electronic copy if I were going to buy anything. Of course, the notebooks. There's 27. Yeah, if you can actually of course find his current repo on GitHub, and the third edition repo, which I've been reviewing, will be ready soon. It's got 27 chapters of notebooks. It's got 10 case studies. I ran a couple of them on my machine today. Each case study had like 17 notebooks or 19 notebooks that kind of kind of adhere to the advice that he was giving in every chapter. And he draws conclusions. Look at what we found here. This really isn't so good. This is promising. This idea probably might be useful, but we have to refine it. It's a really scientific approach to machine learning, specifically in the context of algorithmic training. But it touches on all of the large algorithms that are prominent. What is most useful machine learning algorithm? In finance, it's often what's called a gradient boosted machine, which we're going to cover starting next week. It's a variation on tree diagrams. Tree diagrams work like this. One of the famous toy problems that people start out on Kaggle is the Titanic, where you have to predict whether a person lived or died. And there's like 13 features, like is it a man or is it a woman? Were they riding in third class or first class? Did they get on in Southampton or someplace else? Was it a child? Was it what was their age? And based on these factors, you have the results, which is who lived and who died, and you train a tree to go down that thing and go. Now, if you put enough leaves in the tree, you can obviously predict every single person because there's only 1,000 people on the Titanic. So if you had just even 10 branches times 2 to the 10th power is like 1024. I think.
That's actually what worked the best at Ed's project.
What's that?
That's actually what works the best at Ed's project, Matt's project.
Well, after next week, maybe, when we talk about the gradient boosted machine, so first you learn about trees, then you learn about forests, which is many trees, potentially not that deep, each of which vote on a particular, was this a credit failure or a credit success? And then you move to random forest, which improves on the performance of regular forest. And then finally, gradient boosted machines. Gradient machines, what they do is they take a look at the errors that are made by the previous round of the code, and they try to focus on getting the errors corrected. And in this way, gradient boosted machine or light gradient machines or cat boost, 3 different versions of the same philosophy. That's typically the winning algorithm on Kaggle for data that is tabular, which means that there's a sort of rows and columns kind of thing for making the predictions. The winner in more general things like image recognition would be neural networks, which we will talk about briefly at the end as well. Neural networks are, deep neural networks is where computer vision lies, audio, and also underlies large language models, which have special architectures all tied into deep neural networks. Yeah, so I like this book, but like I say, the new one will be out soon, and good value for the money. So in this book, so in our chapter, the chapter that we covered, well, we covered the unsupervised learning for PCA, and then we talked about the k-means clustering. And if you go through that notebook carefully, he gives a reasonably good explanation of what how k-means clustering works, right? You have to specify the number of clusters, you pick a point at random for the center of a cluster, you assign a data point to this cluster center, which it is nearest to. We talked about, so what does it mean to be near? You have to define a distance. In our case, the distance was defined to be, I've got x, y coordinates, x is the mean return, y is the standard deviation. Measure distances like that. There are other ways to measure distance, and so on. We covered the rest of that algorithm. So that's a pretty easy to understand one. What we did not talk about in detail, we saw this hierarchical clustering, and the hierarchical clustering works like this. So here's a simple example. The example for the 500 stocks, of course, is a lot more cluttered at the bottom. But the statement is initially every, in this case stock, let's say, is in its own unique cluster. And the first thing you do is you measure the distance, the pairwise distance between every set of points. So there's, in this case, looks like there's 20 individual observations. So each of the 20 get compared to 19 others, divided by 2 because it's going to be symmetric, and you have 190 distances. And you find which 2 are closest, and you combine them into the first cluster in this agglomerative clustering. And then you do the same thing again. What they don't talk about in the book, and this is something if you wanted to know, you have to go look it up, right, is, well, how do I decide that cluster 1, 3, well, let's say over here, how did 6, 9 get matched with 10? What was the distance formula? How was it modified? It doesn't talk about it, so if you want to know about it, and if you want to use this algorithm, you'd want to go find out at least what's this doing. When I took like maybe 4 classes in machine learning when I was at Georgia Tech, and in every class we would actually, they'd define the algorithm, and then you'd write the code for the algorithm, and then you'd use the algorithm in some process here. This is obviously a survey course, so we're moving quickly through lots of different techniques where, we're not writing the code. Even in the book, the ISL book, the yellow book, they do give a somewhat detailed description of the algorithm, but they don't ask you to code it, right? They say, okay, well, this thing has been coded up professionally in sklearn, and you should just use that. But you do get the nuts and bolts. We're not really talking about it, but it's good to review it. And the last one, which is ultimately the one he settles on for this process, called affinity propagation, and in the notebook, so, in the k-means cluster, we got these 6 centroids. Of course, we picked 6 based on some analysis that he describes above. We never really talk about, I wonder what would happen if we got rid of this outlier. Kind of interesting to know, what is that stock that had a mean return of 4? Keep in mind, we've done the standard scalar. So this is kind of like 4 standard deviations away from the center of the cluster. And it's also 4 on the volatility axis. So it's pretty far away from all of the other volatility all of the other points. What would happen if we were to eliminate that point? How would this change the clusters? Will we get better results? This is a question you commonly ask yourself in data science in general, right? Which is, what do I do with outliers? Like, are they important? Sometimes they are, right? Like if you said, I'm gonna go look at the stock market and forget about, 2008 and 1987 with Black Tuesday, well, you'd come up with a different opinion about how risky it can be to be in stocks when you're approaching retirement, let's say, right? Generally speaking, things work out in the end, or at least they have in the past 100 years or so of the American stock market, but they always tell you past results are no guarantee of future performance. But this is kind of an easy to grasp story here, and then the environment of clustering, a little bit harder to grasp, certainly kind of hard to see what's going down here, but the idea itself is still the same, and the question is, what do you do with that? And he says, well, one thing you do is you draw, in this case, he drew a line at the line 13. It doesn't talk about what the numbers, total distance in the cluster, I suppose. You drew a line at 13 and you cut it once, 2, 3, 4. You cut 4 different lines, and that's how many clusters you end up with. And he shows you got 4 clusters here. So it's a different clustering, and it's good. Now, we haven't gotten into the details of what it is, but say, okay, well, there are other ways to tackle this problem. It's 4 versus 6, slightly different results. So we have, we might expect a different answer when we start to try to trade this, right? And then finally, he comes up with this affinity clustering, where he ends up with 27 clusters. He doesn't detail the methods that are used or what makes them affinitive with each other. But in the end, he goes, okay, then what we do is, we do a little bit of work and we say, which one's the best? And he hits on the affinity propagation, where he says, I'm going to look at the silhouette coefficient. You have to read up on what, this is kind of where he used to say, like, let me ask GPT, what is the silhouette coefficient? Well, let's try it out. Gemini in my case. What is the silhouette score? And how does it apply to clustering algorithms? So the key word here is how it measures how similar an object is to its own cluster, which is called cohesion, and versus points in other clusters, which is separation. And it provides a way to assess the quality of your clustering without needing ground truth labels. And ground truth is, what does ground truth mean in this context? Professor McDonald talked to you about that? Ground truth means you know the answer and you try to get your algorithm to get the answers right. This one says, I don't need ground truth in this context, and that makes it an essential tool for unsupervised learning, right? Where I want to learn something about this data.
You don't want to give it the answer.
Well, you don't know the answer, right? In a way, like, we got these massive 500 stocks. We're just trying to find out ones that we might be able to buy one and sell the other whenever they get too far away from each other. How do we determine those pairs? And that's the problem we're solving here. So it tells you what the silhouette score is here. So I find that this has actually become an effective way for me to learn lots of relatively complicated things. I wade into it, I kind of get a general feeling for what's going on, and then I hit on the parts that are most, I think, interesting to me, and I just ask Gemini to give me a quick summary, tell me what this thing is, knowing that it will write the code for me once I'm happy with it. So the final piece here, and we didn't talk about this, he does show that the cluster, these stocks from the different clusters, there's some way to make this thing not do it. I hate when it does this thing in the box here. I stop. Not that way. In a notebook from creating scorecards. Output graphs. This has a simple solution, which I never do. If you're currently using Matplotlib, you have interactive background. Class Click the area, shift 0 on the keyboard.
Now, what are you trying to do right now?
Right now, it said it crashed on, it couldn't find Panda's data reader, and I looked this up before. And it's,
But you're doing it on the internet, wouldn't they have pandas, like you would assume?
no, this is,
Pandas and Pandas data reader are two different things.
requirements already satisfied.
So you'd copy that, put it into Gemini, and
Yeah.
let him figure it out?
Yeah, it'll figure out like classic incompatibility between Pandas and Pandas data reader, okay. Use Yahoo Finance, okay. Quick monkey patch, okay. Go for the quick monkey fix.
Why do they call it a monkey fix? Because even a monkey could do it?
No, because this is what a monkey would do instead of doing the right thing, I suspect. This one should work. All right, let's go to the other solution. Always good to hit save. Okay, so he runs this silhouette score, and based on the one for k-means, one for hierarchical clustering, and one for affinity propagation, it concludes that it's kind of interesting, when this notebook was created, the best one was affinity propagation, but higher is better, closer to one is better. K-means has actually moved into the lead. I don't know what happened to the data in between when this notebook ran and when I'm running it here. But it goes ahead and comes up with a few, there, it did remember that. It comes up with a few, it looks at a few of the clusters, and this is meant to show the author's opinion. These things really do move together, that's kind of the story. And then the idea of the pairs trading would be, the blue guy seems to follow along pretty good, except it has a big deviation here, so maybe this is assigned to go long the blue and short either the red or the orange. The red and the orange follow each other very closely, and what would the trading opportunities be? Maybe here, you'd say there's a trading opportunity. Cluster 11, XEC and DXC in blue and orange, seem to be companion stocks until over here, again, the blue is on the down. So this is the idea of pairs trading, and like I say, this was probably the first widely practiced algorithmic strategy, starting at Morgan Stanley in the mid to late 80s. It's still used significantly. A lot of people, maybe you've heard of 130-30 funds. You know what that is, Jose?
Yes.
What is that?
A 30-30 fund?
No, 130-30.
Oh, 130-30.
So they put their money, you put $100 in,
Mm-hmm.
and what you do is you short the worst 30 stocks, or worst 30% of stocks in S&P 500, let's say, and go long the best. You put an extra 30% into the best stocks. It's up to you to pick best and worst, right?
That sounds like a hedge fund strategy. That's just.
Yeah, it's kind of more like smart beta, I suppose, which is.
I mean, I've seen smart beta strategies, but I've seen a bunch of different ones.
Yeah, no, there's a million ideas, right? In this case, the 130-30 is a common way of saying we're going to put more confidence in the good stocks and we'll fund ourselves by shorting the weak stock, because we want to keep only $100 in the market. So we'll be long $130 worth of stock, short $30, and
Firm believer in market neutral. I'm always in market neutral.
well, that's market neutral, as it were, right? So, yeah, okay. So he gets these clusters, and then the last thing he talks about, and if you read this way, maybe you need to read the book, or ask, Gemini, shift enter me, what is co-integration? It sounds like correlation, but it's not exactly the same thing. So we'll go over here, and as I mentioned last week, co-integration is a technique that won Nobel Prize for the creator of it, and another guy from NYU, Robert Angle, and I forget, Stuart Granger, not Stuart, but Granger. Statistical property where two or more non-stationary, what does non-stationary mean? It means that in the simplest case, the mean is moving
Changes
throughout
with time.
time, or the variance is moving throughout time. The two non-stationary time series share a long-term equilibrium relationship. Even if they drift randomly, a specific linear combination of them stays within a tight mean reverting range. So this is the idea. We find stocks that are co-integrated, which means they tend to travel some linear combination of them. Two of these minus 1.7 of the other one, let's say, has a very stable value. And look at, nice of it to tell the world I'm working on natural gas trading strategies, which I am, of course. But Google Gemini likes to say, good job, Ed Hayes.
There's an error I remember in statistics from 100 years ago that if they're not, it's either they are co-integrated, there's an error, or if they're not co-integrated, there's an error. I don't remember what it is. I forgot the
Yeah, I think the idea is, in some cases, you do not want things to be co-integrated, i.e. to have a
Yeah.
unit root, because whatever statistical analysis you're about to perform is not valid in that context.
Yeah.
Professor McDonald will know about this better. He has a master's degree in statistics, among other things.
Got it.
And, the drunken man and his dog analogy. Okay, this man walks randomly, the dog also wanders randomly, but they're connected by a leash, so they can't walk too far apart. In terms of stock, two stocks are I1, which means they're non-stationary, they have a unit root, but the spread, stock A minus beta times stock B is I0 stationary, okay, integrated of order 0. Co-integration versus correlation, it is common to confuse the two. And then finally, here's a definition, Here's how you test for the Engle-Granger method. So these are the two guys who got the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002, I think, for their work on this. One from San Diego, UC San Diego, the other one from NYU. Wearing my NYU today because, you know, I need to represent now and again. Here's how you might use it. Identify two co-integrated assets, Exxon and Chevron, ExxonMobil and Chevron. So they, some combination of them might be a stable, so long one, short the other, obviously. Okay, monitor the spread. When the spread widens significantly, greater than 2 standard deviations, for example, sell the outperformer and buy the underperformer. And close the position when the spread reverts to the mean, okay? All right, so that's what the co-integration is. And based on the co-integration,
So in this situation.
yep,
We want co-integration because it speaks to a relationship between these two stocks that we can explore.
that's right. And in fact, we'll see in a second. In this particular example, the algorithm, the co-integration test finds 32 pairs of stocks that it considers to be co-integrated and includes 47 of the tickers. So these become candidates for putting on a pairs trading strategy, which means that you now have the idea, it's told you which, kind of interesting, a lot of them begin with A. I guess this all is co-integrated with a lot of things. You have 47 pairs. The goal would be to find one or more of those pairs that you can track in real time, and when they diverge from their historical relationship, you put a trade on. And then he gives a pair visualization using something called T-SNE, which we're not going to cover in here, but it's worth looking up. And that comes up with this graph, which is kind of interesting because it has there's no axes to describe what are these dimensions, but I think it's worth looking into. And in particular, as I mentioned last week, XEC and DXC, which seem to be far away in whatever this graph is, and nonetheless are co-integrated. That was the last pair up here. So my suggestion, idea for you to investigate, I'll send you some suggestion how to use this, is to look at these two stocks, XEC and DXC, see if you can find a combination that is co-integrated, and use that to pairs trade it, not up to 2018, which is the data that we have, but beyond 2018. So I'll put that together for you this week. And after you finish Professor McDonald's stuff, if you have some time, go ahead and take a look at it. Okay. All right, so now this week, what I want to talk about is reinforcement learning, which is a third branch of no, it's a third branch of machine learning, where the first two branches that we talked about were supervised and unsupervised learning. So, in particular, I'm jump to the fun picture first. A second. So we will, in a few minutes, find ourselves talking about this Markov decision process. So, and we'll see how this ties into reinforcement learning. So the idea of reinforcement learning is that you create an agent which you put inside an environment. And what first. Yeah, so you create an agent, which will be your code, and you put it inside an environment. And what happens is the agent takes some action, A, at time t, and sends that message to the environment. I think of a robot trying to clean a a minefield of trying to find gold in a grid without stepping on a landmine, let's say, okay? So the robot's goal is to learn how to navigate the environment without blowing itself up. So the robot has 4 steps. It can go left, right, up or down, depending on whether or not it's near a wall. It tells the environment, here's where I am. The environment gives it a reward, where a reward can be negative infinity, or be blown up, okay? And then it also updates the state, and says, for example, it tells you in this state you can go left, right, or down, but you can't go up because there's a wall blocking. And the agent says, okay, I'm going to take another step, and this goes on indefinitely, let's say. And that's what a reinforcement learning problem looks like. There's an environment, which is a set of rules that describe what happens when you are in different states, S, and take different actions, A. And the policy function, which we'll learn about, is a function that says, if I find myself in state S, here's what I'm going to do. And the state is whatever it takes to fully describe the information that the agent is allowed to know about the environment, including they'll have history in their own mind. Their history can tell them, here's where I've been before. And then there's a value function, which is what we're going to try to find, which says that if I'm in state S and I take action A, how much reward can I reap? And finally, the objective would be to iterate your way through playing the game, as it were, and become better at solving the problem. The first examples of where reinforcement learning really got into the public consciousness were work done by people at DeepMind, now a part of Google, but then an independent company in Cambridge, I think, maybe Oxford, I forget, I think it's Cambridge, in the UK, and they taught reinforcement learning algorithms how to play Atari games. So you may have seen videos of, actually find it. Should bring up Breakout first, that's kind of the best one. So this was Google's DeepMind's DeepQ Learning. It's only a minute 42, I don't know if it has any music. It would be nice if it did. So if you've ever played this classic arcade game, it's just kind of winging the paddle back and forth, it doesn't really know what's going on. Keeps
So it's
missing.
learning as it's going on.
But it's, and so, you know, what, let me just pause here. So what is the state here? So the state is the pixels. So the only thing that the agent knows is the
There's
colors.
a set of pixels up there.
It knows the pixels, and it has a memory of the last 4 things it's been shown. So I don't know whether this refreshes every 10th of a second or every 100th of a second or so, but it refreshes, so it has that 4-second buffer, that 4 scenario buffer to be able to begin to learn the speed of the ball and the angle of the ball, which is obviously what it needs to.
Well, how much is it retaining if it's got?
It's only it's retaining, so this is we've frozen this screenshot. It will retain 4 of these that are very close to each other in time. I don't know how close they are, but probably, you know, on the order of on 100th of a second maybe or something like that, okay? So it's given that picture, and and then it takes an action. Maybe it does nothing, but when it takes an action, of course, which is, its only actions are left and right on the paddle, right? It takes an action, sends that back to the game. The game sees the action and updates the screen, which is like, I move my paddle to the right, the game doesn't care, this ball is going this way, it's gonna keep going. The only thing that the game ever notices about the player is when the paddle hits the ball, and then the player, the game adjusts for that. So initially it's got nothing going on, that's 10 minutes, then 120 minutes, so 2 hours later, what does it do? It starts this, first of all, it can see where the ball is, so it's getting very good at not missing the ball, and then also it figures out, of course, that the way to win the game is to get yourself up into the back row, and then all the bricks start
But
falling.
how does it do that with only 4 seconds of memory?
Well, so this is where the magic happened. Realize, let's go back to that just a second. Hold on.
Okay, I missed it.
So at that point, what it was good at getting the paddle in the way of the ball, right? That's what it learned in the last, but it does not yet know that getting the paddle in the way of the ball is not enough, because it's hard, right?
Mhm.
At least hard to win quickly. So it realizes the most effective, digging a tunnel is the most effective way to beat the game. So here it goes. And so by the way, it's getting rewards. The other thing I forgot to mention, it does get rewards, right? Which is the score is changing. And it eventually figures out that if I do create a tunnel here, I'm gonna get a lot of rewards in a little amount of time. That's kind of the story here. And you can see now it's all of a sudden, it made that little hole on the left-hand side, and that's it. And so, DeepMind taught the game to, taught its reinforcement learning models to beat all 50 classic Atari games, or whatever the number was, and then moved on to bigger things. And what were the next things it tackled? Most famously, it tackled chess, which had been solved by IBM's Deep Blue back in '97, but it tackled chess in a different way, and then ultimately tackled Go, which was thought to be unplayable by machines. And Go is, everybody know what Go is?
That's the Japanese chess.
It's an Asian game with a board that's,
Black and white pieces.
I guess it's 19 by 19. You put black and white tiles on it, and if the black tiles manage to encircle the white tiles, all the white tiles that are inside the circle get flipped over, and eventually at the end of the game, the board's all black or the board's all white. And the very popular in Korea, among other places, where the world champion was what's level 9 Dan, or level Dan 9, I forget but like grandmaster of grandmasters essentially. And eventually, DeepMind hired someone who wasn't quite as good as that player to play against the DeepMind game. And the DeepMind game learned certain things more about the game by playing against really talented humans, and eventually defeated there's a movie about it actually. I don't know, it's probably about an hour. You can find that on YouTube as well, about how they beat the guy, and that was the end of that was their big splash. Okay, so great, it can play games. Good enough so that Google bought them out for like $500 million. Demis Hassabis, who is the CEO and one of the main brains there, is the head of DeepMind inside of Google now. And their big, real achievement to date was they came up with ways to solve protein folding problems, right? Apparently, in I guess biochemistry or some branch of biology, a big issue in creating new synthetic compounds is to figure out how the various shapes of proteins can be folded in such a way that they fit together. They produced a paper which said, we found 10 possible protein combinations which could be used for drugs, and here's their chemical formulas that we found purely by reinforcement learning. Some of which turned out to be potentially useful drugs, and Demis Hassabis and one of his partners at DeepMind got the Nobel Prize in medicine in 2024, I think, 2025. So that, and at the heart of what they do is reinforcement learning. So we'll look at a version of this, but just to get to what this is going to look like when we, after we go through a little bit of theory, is we'll do a little bit of math. This is wearing my NYU shirt today. So did my math work there. And, but we'll come down, this is what's known as a Markov decision process. The key word Markov, named after a Russian mathematician from around 1905. Markov process means that in order to understand what's happening, you only need to know where you are right now in the process. You don't need to know the history. So part of the definition of Markov process is the only thing you need to know is the current state. In this case, there are three states for a market. There's a bull market, a stagnant market, and a bear market. So you're always in one of these three states. And depending on the action you take in that state, you go to another state. So in this case, let's take the bull market case, your choices are, you can buy, I think one of these is supposed to, let's see. I gotta review these in my mind for a second. Oh yeah, so you can take action 0 or action 1 in the bull market state, or action, you have three actions, A0, A1, and A2. I gotta refresh my memory as to what they are. In stagnant market, you can do A0 or A2, and in the bear market, you can only do A1, okay? So let's look at the bear market case, that's the easiest one to understand. In the bear market, you only have one choice, which is action A1. I don't think they're all supposed to say buy. I think that's the problem. I think buy, sell, and hold are more likely the choices. So if you buy, which you have to do, it's your only choice, in A1, you can see three numbers coming out of the buy triangle, the buy rhombus at the top, which is 10% chance you buy and you go back into the bear market, 10% chance, 0.1, you buy and you find yourself in the stagnant market, and 80% chance you buy and you end up in the bull market. And depending on which action you take and which state you're coming from, you earn rewards of 200 or 50 over here, or if you're in the stagnant market and look what happens here, if you're in the stagnant market and you take action A0, you go back to the stagnant market. And as long as you keep doing this, you never escape the stagnant market. So eventually you take your other action, which is A2. Unfortunately, you end up in the bear market, and you lose 250. So there's a 100% chance once you get here, you'll lose the 250. But otherwise, there's a 100% chance you never get out of here, so you can never get any rewards, and consequently, you're just sitting there, right? But if once you get into the bear market, there's a 80% chance that you'll get the 200 reward, and you get yourself back into the bull market. Once you're in the bull market, if you take action 0, you get a $50 reward, and you can keep getting these 50s as often as you take this step. So in theory, what will happen is the algorithm will learn that sometimes it has to absorb this pain of doing this in order to, and eat this negative reward in order to get over here where it earns the 200, and then it can cash out the 50 for a while. So we'll look at how that problem gets solved in code after we take a break. So let's take a break. Yeah.
With this,
Yes.
but it's not in the GitHub. I'd have to buy the book on O'Reilly.
No, because it is in the PowerPoint that I sent out in the materials for email.
So I have that pie chart. Let's see.
Yeah, not only do you have the code there, but you should also have the,
Notes for RL.
yeah, that one will have, yeah, there's a PDF and a PowerPoint, both of which have this diagram in
Ah, I see it.
it. Yeah,
I see it in the PDF.
yeah, it's also in the PowerPoint too, I think. Yeah, the PowerPoint's called PowerPoint and the PDF are the same thing. And then what we'll do at the end of class tonight, we'll look at code that implements one version of the reinforcement learning algorithm to come up with how much money you'll make in the long run as a function of which state you start in.
State, as in not geographical state, but the.
Which of the
One of
three
those three
blue
states.
circles you find yourself in at the beginning.
Gotcha.
Obviously, if you start here, it's not that great because you have to eat one of these in the beginning. Whereas if you start here, that's great because you will,
You'll maximize
there's
your
80% chance you'll get to 200. There's a 10% chance you stay back in the bear market, so you can still escape. There's only a 10% chance that you get shot down to here and have to, and if you think about it, since there's only a 10%, well, there's an infinite series you can do, right? There's an 80% chance I'll get to 200 right away. There's a 10% chance that I get another shot at the 80% chance. So that means 80% plus 10% of 80%, which is 8%, right?
Mhm.
Plus 10% of that, which is gonna be, so you'll be at 8.88. So there's 88.88% chance that you'll get
That
to
you're gonna be
if you
the-
start
the
here,
200.
you're in the 200. But that means there's a 12% chance, or 11% chance that you end up here and you have to eat the 250. So that's good. Starting out from the bear market, you have an 88% chance that you'll get at least 200.
So if I'm in S1, and you're saying that the odds are based on the board, I'm either I only got a 12% chance of getting.
If you're in S1 and you eventually realize this never does anything for you, right?
Well, then my ask would be what about the mitigants?
So
How do I mitigate?
So if you're in S1, you know that there's essentially 100% chance that you'll have to eat 250.
Yeah.
At which point then,
Gotta get
you'll
to
have
the
an
truck.
88% chance of getting 200, plus whatever happens when you leave the 200. Because when you leave the 200, there's a pretty good chance you'll get the 50 at least once or twice.
As someone that's invested before,
Mhm.
like, I look at this and I'm like, this is too confining, I guess, in my head. Because there's ways to make money in a bear market, there's ways to make money in a stagnant market, there's ways to.
Well, this is just a toy model. I think it's what I actually call the code that
And
this is a toy. right?
This goes back to what I told you
Yeah.
at the beginning, where in my head I'm like, no, but how does this work? Because I know in my world, I've made money in bear markets. I was a part of the K curve. I made a ton of money in a bad market.
Yes, but most people lose money in a bear market. That's why it's called a bear market.
Got it, okay.
I mean, the market cap falls from 5 trillion to 4 trillion. $1 trillion disappeared. Now,
Yeah.
if somebody made money,
No.
then that means that some other person lost even more money.
Yes, 100%. I don't.
On average, the good thing about a bull market is everybody essentially makes money because the money's just getting bigger.
Yes, 100%. I just know I've made money in stagnant markets and I've made money in bear
You've
markets.
probably also lost money in bull markets on occasion.
Oh, 100%.
Right, so
100%.
that's part of the charm. But this is a toy to keep in mind. At DeepMind, they started with playing Atari games, and they ended with the Nobel Prize in Medicine for discovering protein folding algorithms that were extremely useful.
So I guess then I'll ask this. This is just, I guess, more theory. What is the goal of this toy model? What is it supposed to be teaching?
Well, we can't really teach reinforcement learning by starting with the protein folding model. This is easy enough to grasp. First of all, it bears some semblance to reality, which says, if you enter the market in a bear market, that's probably not the worst thing in the world because bear markets don't last forever, and you're going to probably get a good start. I mean, it's only a toy model. If you enter in a bull market, that's pretty good. You can print a lot of 50s.
No. Like in my head, I'm looking at this.
But it's
and I'm
teaching
like,
you how we're going to write the algorithm that will answer this problem.
So this is the
This is an initial guess. You're gonna tune this to match.
Well, we're gonna
This is
learn.
the game that we just, the brick breaker. This
Right.
is like the brick breaker, and
Right.
it's gotta learn how to play in each of these states.
It will learn what your best first step is.
Got it.
So what's your best first step if you're in the bull market? I guess it's to do this, because then you can get the 50, 70%. So this thing is worth $35, 0.7 times 50.
Yep.
Plus a couple more iterations that add a few pennies onto that.
Got it.
And we should find that when we get there, it will tell you what your first step is out of it. Let me, before we kick it off again.
You guys know how many assignments are due for this class so far?
So
It's
I
four,
already
right?
turned in 2.
Yeah, too.
I
Well,
turned in
there's
2
actually,
to Nate.
Well, I mean, there's 3 and then there's the 4th one, right, coming
yeah.
up.
Well, I know there's the one that's due. That's
There were
the-
2 homeworks.
the Credit score one.
There were 2 homeworks. One project has already been due, and there's a second project coming due next week.
Wait, what
2
what
homeworks.
project was already due?
The housing for
The housing one, and then there's a credit one coming up next week that he already
Yeah,
said.
that's the one I said.
I thought it was 3
I
homeworks,
completely
so-
missed the housing one. Oops.
There were only 2 homeworks that I saw.
What the hell did I submit?
I might have done more than one together, but I took
This
one.
was like rent or buy, right?
Right, yeah, that's the one. I'm trying to remember now, what did I submit to him?
Oh, I completely missed that one. I guess I'll be doing that tomorrow. Handing that one in.
You guys start working on this one?
Yeah, I already finished
You
it.
finished already? You did an R or Python?
R.
Okay. Let's see.
Why did I think that the housing affordability one was something that we did in class? It's not a big one.
No. And then we do to the right, we get to the break. Yeah. Actually, the left of the break. Yeah. There's something going on in the auditorium, because there's a stranger walking in.
Yeah, that was, I think it's like a show, cause I saw
Is it a show?
some performers or something.
Nice. It's funny, even our secure website has not trusted certificate messages coming up. That's not good.
A Windows update today said it patched 157 different vulnerabilities.
Sounds like a lot.
It was the second most of all time.
tickets for the Knicks on Saturday as low as $315.
You couldn't pay me to go see a pro basketball
The
game.
Knicks,
Yeah, it's playoffs at the Garden.
$15?
300.
Oh, I thought you said $15.
I briefly
What?
saw 15 as well, but no. As low as $315.
I would have said, okay, we're going right now.
15. Yeah,
15 bucks.
I hit it. You know what they say in finance, right? If it looks too good to be true, too good to be true.
It probably is.
Oh, so assignment 3 was the the verb affordability one, right? That
Yeah, that was a project more
yeah,
so.
the part. Okay,
I was freaking out. I know I did it. I was like, okay.
yeah, okay.
Now with this Markov graph, I would run that 1,000 times with Bayesian, put it in a loop, and then adjust all the parameters so it matches what the market does. Then you can make your agent decide what to do. It's like a boundary level differential equation problem. I tried running that code though. That code from that you had for this.
Yeah.
A lot of those APIs have changed since last year already though. It was saying TensorFlow is different, Keras is different.
You know what you should do is just the one that says the toy model. That's the one we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, I don't know which one I did. I just played with it quick.
You know, if you
Set it
try
up.
the case study ones, those will have issues.
But neither one of those is by default loaded in Python, so you gotta pip install them. TensorFlow and Keras. Toy model. Let me see toy model.
Give me about 3 more minutes. So, as we talked, we have a total of 8 things will define our reinforcement learning problem, right? We'll have an agent who is living in an environment. The environment will tell the agent the state that he currently finds himself in. It's hot, it's cold, it's raining, it's sunny, stock market's going up, it's going down. Based on this information, the agent will take an action, which he reports back to the environment, and the environment gives him a reward, which could be +1, 0, -1, or it could be some other more grand scheme of possible rewards. And the goal of the reinforcement learning algorithm is to learn the optimal policy. PI stands for policy here, which says that when I'm in this state, I should take the following action. Or I may have a set of random actions. So for example, I might say, okay, if I find myself, standing on this square and, the lake is on my left, sometimes I'm gonna go up, sometimes I'm gonna go right, sometimes I'm gonna go back, and maybe there's a probability distribution. 50%, I'll flip a coin, 50% chance it'll go this way, or roll a die, 25% chance it'll go this way, 25% will go backwards. And based on what I do, I will learn something, because I'll give an action, I'll get a reward, and then I'll try to modify my behaviors in such a way so that my policy will evolve to be the optimum policy. The value function just says if you start in a certain state and you take a certain action, here's the value you can expect to earn by performing optimally according to the policy for the remainder of the way. So I take one step, okay, maybe I get a reward, maybe I don't, but now I need to make another decision. Like he says, okay, there's a wall over here, so okay, I'm gonna go this way, and then I blow up, okay, well, I'm gonna try to learn not to do that. And we'll build a table, as we'll see, where we remember things that happened to us in the past, and we try to find a way to navigate the maze successfully. That's the problem we're solving. Right? So we end up with a sequence, as it says here. We find ourselves in state 1. We take whatever action we decide in state 1, action 1, and we get a reward 1. And then we do it again. The environment tells us we're in state 2. We take whatever action we take, and then we get another reward. And we continue going on in this fashion. Okay? And what a policy is, says that the action we'll take at time t is dictated by the policy, which will depend on the state at time t. So the environment will say, here's the state, and based on that state, I'm going to take an action at time t based on the policy I've decided, which could be deterministic or it could be random. Okay? And we'll learn in particular that initially we'll want to spend some time taking random steps. Like, I want to do something I haven't done before because maybe it's better. The common example of this, they talk about a multi-armed bandit, where there are 10 one-armed bandits in a casino, and you're told you can go up to anyone and pull, and whatever the prize is, you get to keep the prize. So you might, how would you play such a game? Let's say you're going to have 100 spins. We'll let you walk into the casino, you could take 100 pulls on each of these 10 arms. What would your policy be as to what you should do? Well, you might start out by saying, I'm going to play each one of the arms once and see how I do. And round 2, you might, I'll play the one that gave me the most, but maybe the one that gave you a nice prize in round 1 doesn't give you a good, maybe gives you no prize in round 2. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to fluctuate between playing what has worked in the past and exploring to see if there's something better you can be doing, right? That would be something you could learn by a reinforcement learning algorithm. So that each of the one-armed bandits might have a distribution of what it rewards you. Like this one over here, 90% of the time, it gives you $1, and 10% of the time, it gives you, $1,000. And the other ones have nothing that, so that if you knew the answer, you just play one all the time, because that's the best you could do. Is you 10% of the time, you get 1,000, and you get $10,000 plus the ones in that case, okay? Maybe that's the best possible, but you won't know that until you explore. So the machine learning algorithm would be about how to balance exploration with exploitation, as it's called, okay? That's the formulation of a policy, which you're trying to learn from playing the game. Now, what we're going to want to learn is called a value function. The value function is how much money you can be expected to earn starting from state S, and implied by following a certain policy. Looking at the stock market example we saw, in some cases, sometimes the stock market's going to give you better options than other times. And in that little game we'll see when we look at the code, you do the best you can is all you can ask. All right. So what is the value, right? So the so-called, what do we call this here? Okay, the cumulative discounted reward. Which we'll call, the gain at time t, is you're going to take a step and you'll get a certain reward, and then you'll get some feedback from the environment, and you'll take another step. That's a Greek letter, small gamma, and you get a different reward. And you take another step, and you get another reward. And gamma is the discount factor for one period. So those of you who are coming from finance know that the first thing you learn in any finance curriculum is the time value of money, right?
Mhm.
So gamma is going to be between 0 and 1. So this might say, what I get in my next step, I'm not going to discount, or we can discount it once if we wanted to. And whatever I earn in the second step, maybe it's worth 99 cents on a dollar, and the next one maybe is worth 99 cents squared. These are periodic discount factors, okay? And the reason why gamma has to be less than 1, because if gamma was 1, the maximum value you could earn playing G, if the rewards are positive, would just be infinity, because you keep going on. But the gamma function says that eventually rewards way out in the future don't really move the needle. In particular, if you're talking dollars and cents, the discount factor is big enough and the rewards are constant. Let's say at $1, you stop incrementing your total gains by.
And doesn't that, just literally, contradicts the, present value theory?
Yeah, well, I mean, even if you have a perpetual bond, right, where you give the seller $100 and he or she gives you $5 every year forever,
Mhm.
right? So the first $5 is worth, $5 discounted by 1 year. The
Correct.
$5 you're going to receive in 1,000 years is it's
Yeah.
something, but it's like
It's not worth anything.
0.0000001, right?
Yeah.
It's not worth anything, right? But you do keep still getting it. So that's what the effect of the gamma is here. Okay, so the value function as a function of the state you're in is the expected value of the total reward conditioned on the fact that your current state is S. So if you pull back that example of the 3 blue circles from before the break, you could be in bull market or bear market or stagnant market. So those are the 3 states, states 1, 2, and 3. The value function of that state is what's the most you could expect, how much you could expect to earn if you behave optimally coming out of that state. And the expectation operator just says that this is gonna potentially be a probabilistic concept. Like, you might not always get the same answer, but on average, you'll get this number, okay? And then we also define a Q function, which turns out to be an important part of what they used at DeepMind in order to solve some of the problems that they solved. And that just says the following. So the Q function depends on both the state and the action. So this just says Q of the state and the action is how much can I expect to earn given that I'm starting here and I take this action. So obviously your goal in every state would be to pick the little a that makes that number as big as possible. And the true value, the true Q of SA would be if you did optimally all the time. It would tell you what action to take, okay? Okay, now. We have a value function and a policy for how to act on it. That tells us what action we want to take. We get an observation. And we tell the model, we learn. So model is not necessarily something that's static that says always do the following. The model should evolve. If you learn that pulling slot lever number 1 gives you a high payoff on a regular basis, your model should say, I'm gonna put more weight on 1 than I used to. If it says that, you get nothing when you pull on model 1, well, your model should update itself. So initially we said we start with the bandits, we would say, the multi-arm bandits, right? We would just randomly try all 10. 10% of the time I pull each lever. But eventually, keeping track of the history, I've got, 100 pulls, or maybe I got 1,000 pulls. Eventually I learn which ones have better payoffs on average, and I should start leaning towards that. But again, aware that there's still value in exploration, which says that, I haven't tried lever 7 in a while. Maybe I just had bad luck with it on the first one, and it's gonna be better. Because your goal is to really find the stable policy that will give you the maximum possible payout. Okay, now, one of the first people who did a significant study of this type of problem was a guy named Richard Bellman at Bell Laboratories, AT&T, in probably the 1960s. And what he said was that the value function at time S is equal to the expected value of the first reward you're going to get, plus the discount function times the value function conditioned on. So what this statement says is, look, we have that value function, we're going to copy it up here. So, let's go to, put them in this order. So we have this. We have this gain function. How much money will I make? We have the value function says, how much can I expect to gain given that I'm starting in state S? And then we have the Bellman equation, which says, well, another way to describe the value function is, well, you're gonna take a step out of state S and you're gonna get a certain reward. And then you're gonna find yourself with exactly the same problem, which is to get the value function again, except now I have to hit it by a discount factor because one period of time has elapsed. And then I'll collect this value function again, which is what I started with. So what this creates is a recursive algorithm that says, if I only knew what was going on at state t+1, I could multiply that factor by the discount factor and add the expected reward in the new round, and that would be my value here. And the goal would be to go from the final state, if I only get 100 plays on the multi-arm bandit, back to 99 to 98 until eventually I get back to the 0 and I know what my initial value is. That's what the Bellman equation tells us. And there are algorithms for solving these. Bellman equation is kind of a concept that's used in American options pricing, where American options have the property that, well, you can use it in European option pricing as well, actually, which is you say, I know how much this thing is worth at the end of the option's life. If I exercise the option, if the option's in the money when I get to the final day, I exercise and I collect whatever the payoff is. You know, the strike on the option is $100, and I can't get my. We have, you know, in options pricing, we might say that, you know, the spot price at the final time could be anywhere from, say, 300 to like $1. And if my strike is at 100, in every increment of $1, I get a different payout. Every dollar up on a call option is worth an additional $1. Once I go below 100, I get nothing. But knowing where we are then, we can roll back one step and say, well, if I find myself like, so if I'm sitting at $150 today, how much, and the option's gonna expire tomorrow, how much is my option worth? Well, it's worth at least $150, and maybe there's a 50% chance it goes up to 151, and a 50% chance it goes to 149, in which case I might say that, you know, the average is still 150, but it might be a 50% chance it goes up by $1.10, and 50% chance it goes down by 90, in which case maybe my option's worth slightly more. The Bellman process could be used to roll that type of thinking backwards to the price today, given where spot is today. Okay, so we're going to learn, we're going to see in code this algorithm, which is going to say the following. The value function at step k+1 is going to be find the maximum over all actions, the sum over all possible states. Isn't it tight?
Thank you.
Okay. So what does this equation say? The first thing we want to notice about this is this says that I can tell the value at the k+1th iteration of this process, given that I'm in state S, consists of something related to what the value was at the kth step. And what's the relationship? It says, look, take the best action. So the max over all possible actions, we could put A is in the set of all possible actions, and this S prime here means it's all possible states. So what this says is, if I take an action, so with some probability, having taken that action, I move from S, where I am, to S prime, which I'm summing here now. So based on the based on the diagram we looked at before, right? The 3 circles, right? If I take a certain action, action 0, there's a, 70% chance I go here. There's a 10% chance I move back to here, and there's a 20% chance I end up coming back in this way. Okay? So I take an action, but I don't necessarily, I'm not guaranteed what's going to happen. But I'm starting in state S, I will end up in one of the other states, depending on what the probability function says. And when I get to that action, I get a reward having taken that action and moved from S to S prime. So I end up in S prime again. And then finally, I continue from state VK, the prior state, taking S prime, right? So if I can figure out V0, this iteration will work the other way. V0 will tell me all of these terms, and I'll be able to get V1. And then I run the process forward in time, and I would get the final state, okay?
Professor,
Yeah?
so like the action A0, can it still go back to a state 2 times? Like with this, for instance, like the action is returning to.
Yeah, so you go here, right?
Yeah.
And so in this case, 10% chance to escape this loop. And this one also had, 1 second. This one happened to give, there was a 70% chance you get the $50 reward. There was a 20% chance you get no reward, but you're still there. And there's a 10% chance you entered a new state, right? And yes, so once you get back here, the Markov property says, forget about how you got here. Now you're here. You're still facing the 70, 20, 10 split if you take action A0.
Yeah, but I was looking at it like if you take action 0,
Yeah.
then it means like you have 70% chance of getting to the blue state, and at the same time 20% chance of getting to the blue state, which means that like you have 90% chance
You do have 90% chance,
of
right?
getting to the blue state.
Right,
No.
only one of which, this guy will be, this is the bull, like you said. Right? But only one of which you actually made money, one of which you stayed in the bull, but you didn't earn any money, right? Yeah, so there's a 90% chance, if you take action 0, you end up back in the bull market. There's a 10% chance the bull market ends and you march on, okay? Okay, and then we're actually going to end up coding up, or looking at the code for. So this was the iteration. So this one here says that we want to find the value function at step S, and what we do is we take some action, we take every possible action, and we end up acquiring this much value, and we call that the value scheme at the K plus first estimate of the value in time S. And we let K run to infinity, and we hope that it converges on a number which we'll call the value at time S. Okay, which means we've learned how to maximize, and again, the key word is we're learning to maximize some reward function, which in this case, what's the reward? It's just the reward that we get by taking that action, plus how much we get to stay for continuing on in the game. Okay? And we're also gonna have an iteration scheme.
Is there is there like a play out or was there an actual model that's run that showed each iteration through this model and where it wound up? I don't know if this is like something that was shown, like it went through, okay, turn 1, it was in the bull market. Turn 2, it wound up in a stagnant market. Turn 3, it stayed in the stagnant market. Turn 4, it wound up in the bear market. Has anyone ever played this out, or is this just theoretical?
No, we are going to see code that executes
This actual thing?
executes
Oh, okay.
the one associated with the three circles.
Got it.
And what we're gonna come up with is called the Q value, which is the K plus first value. So now the question is, here's where Q comes in. So you find yourself in a certain state, S. Now the real question is, what's your optimal action? You don't really control what state you're in. The environment says, here you are, and you've been dropped down in the middle of this Martian landscape, let's say, and which way should the robot go? This is probably one of the ways that they taught robots to explore Mars.
They
right?
have to,
Which
because
is-
they can't talk to them in real time.
Right, you have to write code that will teach it how to explore its environment. And what do you do when you hit an obstacle, right? Do you keep going forward? Do you go backwards?
Turn backwards, do you go back and turn left? Turn
Right.
back and turn around. Okay, got it.
And they, of course, tested it in the desert, right? But the question is, the Q function, which is really the goal here, is given that I'm in this state, I can take certain actions. What's the value of taking that action, given that I found myself in this state? And the list of available actions could be 3 in our case, or it could be many, and the goal would be to find the Q star, which always tells you the best action to take in every state. And the way you do this essentially is you say, okay, I'm in this state, let me try action 1, let me see what happens. Let me try action 2, see what happens. And as you build up information about how much you get in terms of rewards from each state, you start to say, okay, I've got this set of, in our case, 3 actions, and I'm gonna look at how much money I expect to make by going to each one of those actions. And generally speaking, I'll take the one that's gonna give me the most. But recognizing that just because it's the early leader as the best choice, it might not be the long-term leader, so I'll periodically I'll take a risk and take a less immediate payoff, thinking that maybe it leads me into a better state. In the context of when we're in the stagnant market, right, we saw that I could keep on avoiding buying into the stagnant market, ending up in the bear, but I never get anything, because I'm 100%, I just keep staying in the stagnant market. So eventually we say, all right, well, I'm gonna randomly just try, let me see what happens if I buy here. I don't really wanna buy here because the market feels kind of dead. And sure enough, you lose that $250, but then you do escape back up to the top. We'll see whether or not you would have been better off staying in the stagnant market and never making any money. So the Q algorithm for this is the same thing, which is we say that, again, we want to sum over all states. Our policy function will give us a probability that given we take S, so this in the context of the robot, right? Like, let's say I come to the lake, and I know the lake's in front of me. The environment told me that, and I know, all right, I'm gonna 50% I'm gonna do this, 25% I'm gonna do that, 25% I'm gonna go backwards, and I say, okay, go right, and nonetheless the randomness of the environment makes me go forward. I fall into the lake, and the game is over again, right? So there's a probability distribution which says if you take action S, you don't necessarily end up going where you think you're going to go. You can go to any one of the S primes. Probably you'll end up where you're going, but maybe you don't. That depends on the game you're playing. Okay, and then you get the gamma discounted value of the maximum over all possible actions that we could have taken. And this is what we'll learn how to code, is this algorithm right here. So what this says, oh, I left out, one second. Yeah, so I take a certain step, S prime. Oh, no, I take an action that takes me from S into S prime. And there's various possible S primes I could end up with, depending on whether my action function is deterministic or not. And then I get the reward for being in that state, plus I get the gamma of going forward. And what I want to get is I want to get the best possible, I'll put a star here, which indicates if I had the optimal policy, I'd end up getting the best possible state. I'll find the action that gets me the best possible state there. So we'll start from Q0, where everything is essentially going to be random, and then we'll iterate and we'll ultimately find ourselves in the state Q infinity, where we know exactly what we should do, and then we enter the game and we start playing, and we should optimize what we get. Okay, so what we're going to learn in this code, what we're going to see in the code that we have, so I didn't have the S0 circle quite right. One second here. Right. So the one correction that this needs is that, I'll put this right here. So the diagram unfortunately is got a few mistakes in its labeling. So the three actions, A0, A1, and A2, are hold, buy, and sell. Those are your fundamental actions in the stock market, right? So in the stagnant market, your choices are, so it says buy every time. That's unfortunate, but it says you can buy, you can hold, which is A0, or you can sell. And I suppose in this, again, it's only a toy example, but the psychology is, so you missed this one down, which is just that A0 is hold, A1 is buy, A2 is sell, even though they all say buy. Those are typos. So in the stagnant market, your choices are just hold, and it's stagnant, so everybody just holds and it just sits there forever. And then eventually somebody says, this is crazy. Yeah,
Are
go
we
ahead.
saying that A2 is sell and we're basically realizing the loss, which is why there's a R minus 250?
Yeah, or we could say we're selling and the market collectively says, I'm tired of the stagnant market, I'm gonna do something else with my money, and all of that selling and induces us to enter the bear market as it
Got
were. And in the process, we lose money.
Got
Again, it's a toy, right? But once we're in the bear market, our choice is buy, A1 is a buy, and it's our only choice, buy the dip. This is the great American dream, right? Market's down, I got cash, I'm gonna buy the dip. And 80% after you buy the dip, you find yourself, so notice what happens, you're in a state, right, you're in a blue, which is the state, that's what the market tells you. You take an action, which is the orange, and then the environment tells you, here's what happens. And gives you a reward, right? So in the case where we leave the bear market by buying, 10% of the time, it sends me back into the bear market. It doesn't cost me any money, which is kind of nice of it. Although, 10% of the time, I'm in the bear market, I buy, and I end up back in the stagnant market, which we know is the worst because we can only escape the stagnant market by eating another 250. And then 80% chance we get to collect the 200. Once we get to 200, we're in the bull market, we can keep buying. For whatever reason, buying doesn't get us anything, but holding does get us another $50. Every time we hold, there's a 70% chance we'll get $50. Yes?
So here's where I'm lost.
Mhm.
I'm looking at this and I'm trying to remember, this is reinforcement learning.
Yes.
At each state, shouldn't there be 3 different options that you can run to?
Not necessarily.
Because it looks like bear market only gives you the option to buy.
That's right.
And you get 2 options at the stagnant market.
Yes.
And then you got all 3 at the bull market.
Right. Which is maybe not realistic, but it certainly could be the case that different states allow you different opportunities.
Okay. So why wouldn't?
So for example, we're already in the bear market.
Yeah.
We're scraping on the bottom, and we just say, what's the point of selling now?
Well, that's what I mean. Like if that 10% chance, you stay in that bear market, wouldn't shorting and selling in that bear market make you money?
But as you know, in some contexts, shorting is not an option. Depends on your investor type.
Gotcha. I just like in my head, I'm just like looking at that like sell.
No, but you of course could make, and look, these probabilities are just somewhat random numbers that sum to 1. These awards are just numbers that kind of will make a model give us an answer,
Okay.
right? But obviously, you want to go from understanding a toy model into what could make this a more realistic model. So where a reinforcement learning algorithm might find some play is somebody takes all the tick data from the NASDAQ feed and tries to figure out how do the tick data tell me whether I should be offering more stock at the inside, should I improve on the offer, I'm a market maker, or should I improve on the bid? And how do I, if I keep on behaving a certain way, how do I avoid adverse selection as a market maker? Which is I am putting an offer out there and then I'm getting steamrolled by a large market coming into the order. So you might be able to come up with a more realistic reinforcement learning model that gives you a way of learning from the past how you should have behaved in order to capture that bid offer spread, which is the goal of the market maker, right? Now, it may be the case that you may not be able to put, market maker models tend to be fairly simple because they have to be able to compute their choices of buy and sell, bid or offer, wider spread or more narrow spread in literally microseconds, right? So a model that's too complicated to update would be not that good for them because they'd be getting beaten. So simpler models tend to happen there. But on the order of, if you're trading like a minute, once every minute, maybe a reinforcement learning feature. And you can look up in the literature, if you just, if you research for reinforcement learning models in finance, you'll see lots of academic papers will come up that suggest that it does have applications. But, okay. All right, so that's the model. Let's take a look at what the code looks like. So let's see. It'd be great if I could have a split screen. Okay, well, I included a copy of this picture in in the package I sent out. There's a thing called RL Notes, and there's a PowerPoint. Either one of those has this picture, and so if you can pull that picture up, then we'll be able to look at the next part of the code here. And it'll give us some interesting insights. So they're gonna try to express, so this code is gonna tell us how to find out what the optimal state is. And just to give you a preview of what that's gonna look like, when I pull up PyCharm, actually have the same code in PyCharm, so rather than looking at it there. What we'll find out, when this model runs to its conclusion, we'll see the following. What this says is that if I start in, so this is the state I start in, S0, S1 or S2, so I guess that's bull, stagnant, and bear, I think, right? And this is the action I take in that market, which is hold, buy, or sell. And what this says is if you start in the bull market and you hold, you can expect to make $109. If you buy, you only expect to make $104. And if you sell, you only expect to make $84. And then if you start in the stagnant market, according to this, I think I have these labeled correctly. Let me make sure about that before I go. Let's just see, state and action. Yeah, so this dimension is the state, and this dimension is the action. Curiously enough, if I start in the bear market, it tells you that this negative infinity is a way of saying you can't take this action in the bear market, right? In the bear market, you only have one choice, right, which is to buy. So you can't hold and you can't sell. So negative infinity just means they don't have any, they never got updated. Initially, this entire matrix is filled with negative infinity, and then you gain value until you stabilize. But this is the best of all worlds. Starting the bear market, you can make $269 by playing this game, as it were, forever. Okay? Start in the bull market, the best you can do is 109 by holding. Start in the stagnant market, you make $5 if you hold, you make $5.89 if you buy. And we know that the reason that you don't do that well in the stagnant market is because ultimately you have to first absorb that.
Negative 250 hit.
Negative 250 hit. But then you can see you absorb that negative 250 hit, and then you're in that market, which will ultimately earn you 269. And consequently, negative 250 plus 269 multiplied by various discount factors is either 560 or 589. And the 589 just says, better to take the pain right away, right? If you start stagnant and you hold, right, that's your first step, right? That means you're going to wait one more period before you finally get out of the bear market into the bull market. That's why holding is slightly worse than buying immediately in the bear market. Again, you're going to lose 250 coming out of the stagnant into the bear, and once you're in the bear market, you know that being in the bear market is worth $269 in the long run, multiplied by whatever discount factor. You had to wait one period to get there. Okay? So the numbers at least make sense. In other words, this algorithm, which we're about to see, found a way to give us numbers that make sense in context of the rewards that we saw. What's the bad thing about starting in the going back to the bull market, right? Going back to the bull market, buying is not that great because you just get back in the bull market, but you get no reward. Looking at the picture, we see that the best thing to do in the bull market is hold, because hold occasionally shoots you back up and gets you the $50. So if you keep holding, it's kind of your best strategy right there. Interesting question. So how much is it worth to hold? So if you start in the bull market, you get $50, except you only get it 70% of the time. And then you get another $50 multiplied by 70 cents. So you're getting $35 every time. So this number, if you think about the math, right, you're basically getting $35, and then you're gonna get $35 times whatever the discount factor is. And then you're gonna get another $35 times whatever the discount factor squared is. So that'll add up to some number that looks like those payouts. Except, of course, you don't just get the $35, there's a 30% chance you slip down here and you gotta eat one of these 250s to get yourself going again. So that's why that ends up being, the solution ends up being, you know, not as good as for the, starting in the bear market. So how does this model work? Let's take a look at it. Oh, by the way, so I did it 100 times, so let's just focus on this 269 number. If I only iterated 10 times, I get 262. If I only iterated 5 times, I get 246. But if I go up to 50, $268, you know, 500, 269, 36, 5,000, and we'll look at what iteration means. 269. So we're kind of coming to the end of this. And the key thing here is not that you can play this game forever. It just tells you, in this particular simple model, what your best choice is in every state that you find yourself. Buy, sell, or hold. Okay? So how does the model get to this conclusion? How does it implement this? Essentially what we're going to see in the code is an implementation of this Q function. And that thing we're getting at the end is the Q function. Notice the Q function says, you got to tell me what state you're in and what action you take, and I'll tell you how much this thing is worth, okay? And what we have here is, you tell me the state and the action, 3 by 3 in our case, and I'll tell you how much it's worth. Okay, so let's look at the code. I guess that's big enough, right? So the toy RL model iteration with the default values, while we're doing a little Python here, right? We have the usual import, which in our case, we only need NumPy and pandas. So we're gonna do some matrix work, which is why we need NumPy. We're gonna do some tabular representation, which is why we need pandas. And NumPy has a number called not a number, NaN, which just says, you know, you can put this wherever a number should be, but it will blow up any calculation you try to do. And in line 4, we abbreviate NumPy NaN with just NaN. That way I don't have to type NumPy NaN every time. Okay, so we define the transition probabilities in the rewards. I'm importing NumPy again. I get my yellow squiggly from this guy. I'm going to option enter, remove the alias. Yeah, I don't need that, because I already got it up above. I don't think, this isn't even really necessary, it's already imported. That's interesting. Use NumPy. Actually, I don't need this one either, because I've already imported NumPy as NP. Okay. This is why they use NP, because after all, we want to type NumPy 1,000,000 times. And then one more here. NP. Okay. So we define transition matrices. So transition matrices are a fundamental property of a Markov decision process, or which is a Markov chain with choices. So what this says is that given any state, so what's the dimensions of this thing? It's got, first of all, how many dimensions does this thing have? Take a moment to think about what's the shape of this? It tells you right here. It's, you're in a given state, you take a given action, and you wind up in another state. So this is a
27.
three-dimensional vector, right? So it says, if you're in state 0, and you take action 0, we call the action 0, 1, and 2. And
Oh,
state-
0, 1, and 2, that's right, so.
Right, so if you're in state 0 and you take action 0, there's a 70% chance you end up in S prime being state 0, 30% chance you end up in the next state, and 0% chance you end up in the final state. So how does that conform with the diagram? You're starting in the bull market, and you take action 0, you'll see the number 0.7 and 0.3, right?
7, 3.
Yeah, and then there's no, you don't get into the bear market or the bull market, okay? And if you're in state 0 and you take action number 1, there's a 100% chance you end up back in bull market, which is in the bull market, you go up, you hold, take action 1, no, you buy.
No, A1 is hold.
A1 is buy.
Oh, A1 is buy.
Yeah, hold, buy, sell.
Gotcha.
You buy, and then you end up back where you started, so all the probability is there. And if you're in state 0 and you take action number 2, which is you sell, 80% chance you end up back in the bull market, and a 20% chance you drop down to the stagnant market. So that's what this row says, okay? And then 0, 1, 0, you can see that in the stagnant market. If you take action 0, you always end up back in the stagnant market. The next one's NAN, because there's no opportunity to buy in the stagnant market. So those are set to not numbers. And then if you take the sell action, there's a 0, 0, 100% chance that you end up in the bear market, okay? And then similarly, the third row, when you're in the bear market, your only choice is action 1, and the outcomes are 80, 10, and 10, okay? So that's the first step. So this is called a market, notice it's called transition matrices. It captures the fact that in each state, there's a different set of transitions based on your choice. And we need for each one of the blue circles, we need a matrix that tells us what the transitions are based on our being in that state. And then we get the rewards, and the rewards works the same way. Shape is SA, S prime. And you can see your $50 reward, your negative $250 reward, and your $200 reward. Those are the only rewards. And NANs end up in the same place. That just means that these are impossible choices, so we assign them an error. And what that means in particular, if your code were to try to grab one of these things, it would blow up and say, yeah, you shouldn't be here because this is not possible. So whatever you did, go fix your code. And then we get a set of all the possible actions. In the bull market, you can do any one of the 3. In the stagnant market, you have 2 choices. And in the bear market, you only have 1 choice, answering your question from before. Okay? Now let's run the Q iteration algorithm. So the Q is a full array of size 3 by 3 with each value set equal to negative infinity. So the Q, what is the Q function? The Q function is, the Q function is going to be able to tell me the value of every state, every action. And is that line 3 by 3? Right, because there are 3 states and 3 actions, right? There are 3 different states I could be in, the 3 blue circles. There are 3 actions I could take, buy, sell, and hold. So the Q function has to say, given that I'm in one of those 3 blue circles, there are 3 things I can do. How much money am I gonna make taking each of those actions? And then whenever I find myself dropped into this world, I say, okay, let me look at my Q function. I'll just do whichever one is the best. And we started out by saying equal to negative infinity. So if I just run the code up to here, we see that Q is a NumPy array, all initially set equal to negative infinity. So what we say is the original value is everything is worth negative infinity. There's no value at all, but we're going to try to update that. And we make a copy of the Q because we're going to need in our algorithm the new iteration of Q, the K plus first iteration of the Q function will depend on the kth iteration. So we have to remember what the kth is. So what we're going to do is we're going to remember where we were, and we're going to use it 9 times to update this guy. And then we'll make a copy of this guy. He'll become K plus 1 over here, and this will become K plus
So
2.
effectively using the 9 previous things to tell us what to do for the.
What we learned starting from negative infinity, we made a little bit of money by doing this. Now we know what to expect in the next iteration if we were to continue. All right, so in the new, so now what we do, F8, we set all of the, we reset, so we remembered the Q previous, which are our negative infinities, and we have the new Q, which has 0, except, and we only do it on the, notice what we did was, we only looked at states and actions in enumerate A. So you can look at what enumerate says, but basically it says, we're only gonna update these 3 numbers, these 2 numbers, and this number. So we don't wanna pollute the new Q that we're gonna make by getting rid of negative infinities that are supposed to stay there. And we see these 3 negative infinities will never change. And then we have a discount factor equal to 0.95. Now, sort of this is good, we're not yet in the iteration scheme, so we assign the discount factor once. And now what do we do? For iteration, what we do here is, I guess I'm not using that, so I guess I just did this so I could see it as a data frame. And data frames are a little bit nicer to look at. Okay, so now what we do, let's take this, and this is it. One step here is the entire algorithm. So for the state in the range 3, so of all possible, what does range 3 mean? What will happen when you do range 3? What is a for loop over range 3 gonna do? A NumPy, or a Python range is what's called an iterable object, and it will just give you numbers until it runs out. The range 1 will start with 0, and then it will give you 1, and it will give you 2. And the way it's designed, when it wants to give you 3, it will say, oh, I don't ever give out the last number, and it just gives you 0, 1, and 2. Okay? And then for action in all the actions associated with the state. So, you know, how do you understand what this thing does? Well, state is going to start out at 0, right? And what this says is A of state. So what's A? A is this list of lists, right? So what's A0? A0 is the 0th element in the A list, which happens to be a list. And what does it have? It happens to have 3 numbers, 0, 1, and 2. The second element, the first element, A1, has got 0 and 2 as a list. And then the third one only has 1. So what it's going to do,
States.
what's that?
Those are the states.
Yeah, the 3 different lists are the allowable actions in the 3 different states, represented as lists. And then what happens in this loop here, it says for every one of the 3 states, 0, 1, and 2, get all the actions that are associated with that state. So that's going to give me a list of one of those 3 lists. And I want to iterate over that particular set of actions that are available to me. And then for SP, which is, I guess, S prime, that little tick mark on the S, there are 3 possible states I can end up with. And what does it say here? The Q, the new matrix that we're making of this state and this action, is take the NP sum of the transition matrices state action SP times the rewards state action SP okay? Times the discount factor, plus the discount factor times the NP max of the Q previous of SP. Okay, so that statement right there is the code that's associated with the definition of the Q iteration algorithm. I'll leave it to you to ponder that. We'll talk about it a little more next week, okay? So what do we have here? We have a transition matrix times a reward plus the discount factor times another maximum value, which is the, over here you see, that's this part right here. So what is unspoken here is that this sigma is hiding it's over every possible state, so it's actually hiding a matrix multiplication in writing. Let's take a quick look over here. If we take, I'll come to the console down here, and we take, let's just go F8. So I'm in state, let's just go to like, let's just put this here and run it one more time. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Another second. I just want to let this algorithm run just a little bit before we dive into it. Just want to come up one step here. Okay, so right now I'm in state 1. You can see it down here. It's hidden. So let me just, I'm in state 1. And so I take a step, F8, and my action is also a 1. So what is A of state? It's a list containing 1. So we can see when I'm in state 1, my only choice is to take action 1, which is buy, which is
Isn't that state?
buy.
Isn't
Yep.
that state 2?
Yeah, we're in state number.
Or state 3?
Yeah, we're in state number 2. We're already in state number 2.
0, 1, 2.
Yeah, we're already in state number 2, and the only action available to us
Is buy.
is the 1. Okay, so we're only going to iterate once here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take this. So let's take a look at what this does. Let's take a look at. Let me go one more step here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to compute the Q of being in state number 2 and taking action number 1, the only thing we can do. And it says np.sum, what are we summing here? Let's take a look at transition matrix. Let's just look at the first piece of this. Put it in the console. And I'm going to have one too many parentheses. Let me just get back here. Okay. So we get $160. What is that? So we've taken transition matrix. Let's just do state is 2, action is 1, and SP is 0. All right, so let's do that again. So we talked about this. Right, so what we have is that we see the 80% probability pops out, and the $200 reward pops out. And when we multiply the two of them together, we get the 160. All right, so I'll leave that for you to dig through the code a little bit more, to the extent that you are up for the challenge of understanding how this algorithm works. Let's add some junk here now. And we, stop here a second. To the extent that you dive into this, you'll see that these values will converge. We can actually, let's do that. Let's do, if iteration on 10 equals 0, print Q. And let's not do 10, let's make the number of iterations small, like 50. And we'll see what happens when we want to write iteration there. Give my AI a chance. Do not figure out what I want. Okay, so now I'm gonna put a new line after each one. So we see what happens as we iterate through this process. On the first pass, it comes up with the 70% chance of collecting $50 is worth 35, 100% chance of collecting negative 250, and 80% chance of collecting 200 are what populate the matrix. If you only had one chance to take this,
These are the potential outcomes. In
that's
each
what
one.
you'd get. But if you play again, which forces you to keep going around the circle, the values start to move around because you pick up, in some cases you pick up more positive, and you can see that this guy starts to recognize that it's going to be very good to buy. And these guys very slowly accrue value. And then finally, after 50 iterations, we are honing in on the ultimate numbers of 269, 109, and $5.60, $5.80. That's how this algorithm works. Where this will get even more useful and more interesting is when the value function is much more complicated. There are many more states and many more possible outcomes. And the problem moves from iterating over these tables and just continually saying, okay, I'm here now, what was my best choice? And going to that guy and picking it, to developing a neural network that approximates the value, and that's ultimately how they solved some of the Atari problems, among other things. Okay, that's it for this week. I'll send you homework, and it will be, can be your last priority after you finish Professor McDonald's project. Okay, but it'll be an exercise worthy of your time if you find time for it. Okay, all right. And I'll see you online next Tuesday. I'll see you in person. Does everybody like pizza? Do people eat pizza? Anybody? If you don't eat pizza, I'll just send a note out. Just tell me what you'll want to eat from. We usually go to this place over here, just one block over, one block up. What's it called? Great pizza.
Don't know anything about Stanford.
Rome or something. You don't know anything about Stanford? You're in Stanford. You know something. University's here. Where do you come from?
Oh, I'm coming out of Westchester.
Westchester.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I'm the poor guy on the nice block. That's why.
They say, not a bad place to be.
Not at all.
Least expensive house in a very good neighborhood.
I'll take it.
Usually makes that pretty good on appreciation too.
You know what's the worst part of Westchester?
Do not.
Youth sports suck.
Do they?
Yes.
Really?
Well, I only have compared Connecticut.
Okay.
And I compared New Jersey. Okay. Where programs are much more robust.
Okay.
And there's much more variety.
Okay.
You're limited to